The morning I found out I was worth $4.3 million, I was standing in my kitchen in a housecoat that was 2 sizes too big, eating cereal straight from the box. That detail embarrasses me now. Not because of the housecoat, I've earned the right to wear whatever I want at 63, but because of what it says about how small my life had become. I was eating dry cereal at 7 in the morning, alone, while my husband was supposedly on a conference call in his home office with the door locked. And I didn't think anything of it. That was just Tuesday. The call from the lawyer came at 7:42. I remember because I looked at the clock on the microwave when my phone rang the way you do when something startles you. Mrs. Whitmore. A woman's voice, very professional, very calm. This is Janet Reyes calling from Reyes and Caldwell in Kellanea. I'm calling regarding the estate of your aunt, Eleanor Marsh. My aunt Eleanor. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 8 months. Not because we'd had a falling out. We never had a falling out, not once in 63 years. But because my husband had a way of making me feel guilty whenever I made plans that didn't include him. Eleanor lived alone in a house near Okanagan Lake. She'd never married, never wanted to. She used to tell me that was the smartest decision she ever made. I used to laugh when she said that. I wasn't laughing anymore. Mrs. Whitmore, your aunt passed away 3 weeks ago. She named you as sole beneficiary of her estate. I set the cereal box down on the counter. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't know she was ill. She passed quite suddenly. A stroke. She didn't suffer. A pause. Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience to go over the details of the estate, but I can tell you that the total value including the property, the investments, and the liquid assets comes to approximately $4.3 million. I stood there in my kitchen for a very long time after I hung up the phone. Eleanor, my mother's younger sister, who taught me to play cribbage when I was 9, who drove 3 hours to my high school graduation, who sat with me on her back porch every summer, looking out at the lake, and told me that a woman should always have something that belongs entirely to herself. I had not listened. I had not listened at all. My name is Sylvia, and I have been married for 38 years. I met my husband, Douglas, when I was 25 and he was 30. I was working as a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing company in Kamloops. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, loudly, publicly, in ways that made you feel chosen. He brought flowers to my office. He remembered the names of my friends. He made me feel, for the first time in my adult life, like I was the most important person in a room. We were married 18 months after we met. My Aunt Eleanor came to the wedding. She wore a blue dress and smiled at me the whole time, but she held my hands very tightly when she hugged me goodbye, and she said, "You can always come to me, Sylvia, whatever happens. You come to me." I thought she was just being sentimental. For the first several years, the marriage was fine. We had 2 children, our son Brett, who is now 34, and our daughter Cassandra, who is 31. I stayed home with them when they were small, which Douglas insisted on, and which I was happy enough to agree to at the time. Then they went to school, and I tried to go back to work. And Douglas said we didn't need the money. Why did I want to work for some stranger when I could be running our home? So I ran our home. I was good at it. I want to be clear about that. I kept the house in a way that Douglas never had to think about. The appointments, the groceries, the children's schedules, the insurance renewals, the repairs, all of it. I volunteered at the school. I organized the neighborhood association barbecue every August for 11 years. I was, by every visible measure, a successful wife and mother in a comfortable house in a suburb of Kelowna, British Columbia. What I was not for most of those years was a person who had any idea what was in our bank accounts. Douglas handled the money. He always had. In the early years, he gave me a household allowance, a specific amount, every 2 weeks, deposited into a joint account that I could access. It was enough. I didn't ask questions. Then, around year 12, he consolidated things, he said, streamlined the finances, and the household account disappeared, and I was given a credit card instead, a card he could review. A card he paid off himself, from accounts I couldn't see. I'm not saying this to make him sound like a monster. I'm saying it because this is how it works sometimes, slowly. By the time I understood what had happened, it had already been happening for years. The morning after Janet Reyes called, I drove to Kelowna by myself. I told Douglas I was going to see an old friend from my bookkeeping days, which was true in the sense that I had once had old friends from my bookkeeping days. He barely looked up from his laptop. Janet Reyes was a small woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a directness I appreciated immediately. She laid everything out in front of me on a wide oak desk: the property, the investment accounts, the GICs, the savings. Eleanor had been very careful, very quiet about it all, apparently. She had built this over decades, living modestly, investing consistently, telling no one. She thought of everything, Janet told me, including this. She slid a letter across the desk. My name was on the envelope, in Eleanor's handwriting. I opened it right there. I couldn't wait. Sylvia, it read, I know you. I have known you your whole life. Please do not tell Douglas about this money right away. Please, give yourself some time to think first. I love you. I am so proud of you. Eleanor. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in my purse. I sat in the parking lot of Reyes and Caldwell for 45 minutes after that meeting. I thought about Eleanor's face. I thought about what she'd said at my wedding. I thought about the credit card that Douglas reviewed every month, and the accounts I'd never been allowed to see. I thought about something I'd found, 18 months ago, that I had never let myself fully face. A name on his phone. Not a contact. A name in a text message preview that I saw for only a second before he turned the screen over. A woman's name I didn't recognize. And when I asked him about it, very casually, he said it was a client, and I let it go, the way I had been letting things go for a very long time. I drove home. I said nothing. I need to tell you about the next 6 weeks because this is the part people don't understand. They think, you found out, you must have been furious, you must have acted immediately. But that is not how it works when you have been married for 38 years and you don't have a bank account of your own. And your whole life is located inside someone else's life. You don't act immediately. You think. You watch. You become very, very careful. The first thing I did was call Janet Reyes back and ask her to hold off on any transfers or official notifications until I was ready. She understood, I think, more than I said out loud. She was very kind. The second thing I did was call my daughter Cassandra, who lives in Vancouver and works in HR, and who has always been the more perceptive of my 2 children. I called her from my car, in the parking lot of the Superstore on Dilworth, and I told her about Eleanor's passing and the inheritance. Just the basics. Her voice cracked when she heard about Eleanor. Mum, she said after a moment. Are you okay? I'm working through some things, I told her. I'll explain more soon. But Cassie, I need you to not mention this to your father or your brother yet. Can you do that? She didn't ask why. She said, yes, of course. I went home and made dinner. Douglas ate without looking at his phone once, which was unusual. He said the chicken was good. I said thank you. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay in the dark for a long time and I thought about a woman named Cheryl. I had not thought about Cheryl in 18 months. I had put her away in a drawer in my mind and closed it very firmly and walked away. But now I opened the drawer. Her name was in a text message preview. She had texted my husband on a Saturday afternoon in early October while he was in the shower. I had been standing in the bedroom doorway. The phone was on the nightstand. The preview said, Miss, you all ready? Last night was, and then the screen went dark. I should have picked up the phone. I didn't. I was 61 years old and I had been married for 36 years and I did not pick up the phone. I was not going to make that mistake again. Over the next 3 weeks, I started paying attention in ways I never had. Douglas left for work every morning at 8 and returned between 6 and 7. He had always worked long hours. He managed commercial property, several buildings in the Okanagan, so this wasn't unusual. But I began to notice the small things. The cologne he applied before leaving, which was not the same cologne he'd worn for years. The way he showered at night before bed, which he hadn't done since our 30s. The conference calls that happened on Saturday mornings with the door locked. I also began to look at what I could find. There wasn't much that was accessible to me, which was, of course, the point. But I found receipts. I am a bookkeeper by training, and old habits do not die. They sit quietly and wait. Over the years, I'd fallen into the habit of checking coat pockets before laundry. Old receipts, parking stubs, nothing interesting. But now I was looking with different eyes. A hotel receipt from the Coast Capri here in Kelowna, November. A Wednesday night. He had told me he was at a property management conference in Vernon that week. The Coast Capri is 11 minutes from our house. A visa statement that had been tucked into his winter jacket, a supplementary card I hadn't known existed, attached to an account I had never seen. Restaurant receipts. A jewelry store. A florist. None of these things were for me. I took photographs of everything with my phone. Then I ironed his jacket and hung it back up. On the third week, I called my cousin Marlene in Edmonton. Marlene is a retired paralegal and the most practical person I know. I told her everything. Eleanor, the money, Douglas, Cheryl, the receipts. There was a long silence on the other end. "Sylvia," she said, "you need a family lawyer, not Douglas's lawyer. Your own lawyer, and you need to do it before you do anything else." I made an appointment the following Monday. My lawyer's name is Patricia. Actually, no, I need to stop myself. I have agreed not to use her real name here, and I am going to respect that. I'll call her my lawyer. She has an office in downtown Kelowna, near the waterfront, on the 4th floor of a building where you can see a corner of the lake from the waiting room, if you stand at the right angle. She listened to everything. She did not react dramatically to any of it, which I found both calming and slightly disconcerting. "The inheritance," she said, "given that it came to you specifically as a gift or bequest, and has not been commingled with family assets, is very likely protected under the Family Law Act as excluded property. But you need to keep it separate. Do not put it in any joint account. Do not tell him the amount." "I haven't told him anything," I said. She nodded. "Good. Now tell me about these accounts you found." She arranged for a financial investigator, someone who specializes in this, apparently, someone she works with on these kinds of cases. I hadn't known such a thing existed. Within 3 weeks, the investigator had found 2 accounts that Douglas had opened without my knowledge, and a numbered company registered in his name and a name I didn't recognize, to which a significant amount of money had been moved over the past 4 years. The amount was not small. I sat in my lawyer's office on a Thursday afternoon in February, and I looked at the summary in front of me, and I felt a cold, clear feeling move through me that I can only describe as clarity. Not anger. I had been angry privately, at home, in the car, in the superstore parking lot. What I felt in that office was something else. Something quieter and more absolute. "What are my options?" I asked. She told me. It took a while. When I left, I drove to the Tim Hortons on Harvey Avenue, and I sat there for a long time with a coffee going cold in front of me, and I thought about Eleanor, about the house near the lake, about what she had known and when she had known it, and why she had kept her money so quiet and so carefully for so many decades. She had seen this coming before I had. Our 38th anniversary was in March. Douglas suggested we go to Waterfront Wines for dinner, which is a place I genuinely love, and this, more than anything else in those months, nearly broke something in me. The ease with which he made this suggestion. The normalcy of it. 38 years. Waterfront Wines. Anniversary dinner. I said yes. I wore the gray dress he'd always liked. He brought me flowers. We sat across from each other at a small table near the window, and the lake was dark outside, and the candles were lit, and Douglas talked about a property he was hoping to acquire in West Kelowna. And I listened and nodded and asked questions, and the whole time I was thinking about a hotel 11 minutes from our house and a jewelry receipt from a store I had never been taken to. He raised his glass. "To 38 years, he said. To 38 years, he said. To 38 years, I said. I drank my wine. I smiled at him. I looked like his wife. 2 weeks later, I told him about Eleanor. I want to be precise about why I told him, and when, and how, because this is the part that matters. My lawyer and I had spent considerable time by this point preparing. The financial investigation was complete. The documentation was organized. I had my own accounts, set up quietly, in my name alone, with the inheritance funds already secured and properly designated as excluded property. I had spoken to Cassandra. I had spent an afternoon with Marlene in Edmonton, by video call, going through everything. I was ready. I told Douglas about Eleanor on a Saturday morning. He was at the kitchen table with his coffee. I sat down across from him and I said, "I have to tell you something. My Aunt Eleanor passed away a few weeks ago. She left me some money in her will." He looked up. His expression shifted. I watched it shift. Something calculating moved behind his eyes, very fast, and then his face settled into concern. "Sylvia, why didn't you tell me?" I'm so sorry about Eleanor. I needed time to process it, I said. Which was true. How much did she leave you? I had decided what number to say. Not the real number. A number that was true enough not to be a lie, but small enough to be uninteresting. About 60,000, I said. Mostly the contents of the house. The property is going to take a while to settle. He nodded slowly. He reached across and covered my hand with his. We should put it into the investment account, he said. Add it to what we have. Make it work for us. The account I didn't have access to. The account from which money had been moved over 4 years to a numbered company. I'll think about it, I said. He squeezed my hand. Of course. Take your time. I made more coffee. I did not say anything else. The following Thursday, my lawyer filed the petition for divorce. Douglas was served at his office at 10 in the morning on a Thursday. Cassandra called me at 10:47. She had been waiting, not at the office. She didn't know his schedule that precisely, but she had been waiting for my call. Mom, she said, when I picked up, are you okay? I'm okay. I told her, and I was, I think. Or I was becoming okay, which is not the same thing, but is a start. Brett called that afternoon. He was not as understanding as his sister, which did not entirely surprise me. He said that 38 years was a long time, and that people make mistakes, and that I should think carefully before I threw everything away. I told him, very calmly, that I had been thinking carefully for the better part of 4 months. He said his father was devastated. I asked whether Brett knew about Cheryl. There was a silence. Then he said he didn't know anything about that. I believed him. I still do. I love you, I told him. Nothing about that changes. But I am not going to explain myself any further than this. He came around eventually. It took about 6 weeks, but he came around. Douglas, for his part, tried several things in succession. He tried remorse, and I will say this, he is a convincing man. He has always been convincing. He tried to tell me that what had happened with Cheryl was over, that it had been a mistake, that he had ended it. He tried to tell me that the financial accounts were for tax purposes, that it was complicated, that I didn't understand how these things worked. He tried anger, briefly, and then stopped when he realized it wasn't getting him anywhere. What he never tried, and what I found I was waiting for without knowing it, was the truth. Plain and simple and unprompted. He never once just sat down and told me the truth. That, more than anything else, made it easy to keep going. The financial investigation and the legal proceedings took the better part of a year. My lawyer was thorough and calm and occasionally alarming in the best possible way. The numbered company was identified and included in the matrimonial property calculation. Cheryl, as it turned out, had been in Douglas's life for nearly 9 years. I try not to dwell on that number. Some days I manage it better than others. I kept the house. This surprised some people, including Douglas. But I had lived in that house for 22 years, and I had chosen the floors and planted the garden in the backyard and hung every piece of art on every wall, and I was not going to let him push me out of it to go live in a condo somewhere while he rebuilt his life in the home I had made. My lawyer agreed. The court agreed. Eleanor's money stayed mine. The settlement meant that I would be comfortable, not extravagantly so, but genuinely, actually comfortable for the rest of my life. I am 63 years old, and I have never been able to say that before. Cassandra came home for a week in the fall, after everything was finalized. We sat in the backyard in the evenings, the two of us, with wine and the citronella candles. I'd always kept out there to keep the mosquitoes away. The aspens along the fence were turning, the way they do in October in the Okanagan, that very specific gold that you don't see anywhere else. Are you all right, Mum? She asked me, on the last evening before her flight back to Vancouver. I thought about it honestly. I think I am, I said, or I'm going to be, which feels like enough. She leaned her head against my shoulder, the way she used to when she was very small and overtired and trying not to admit it. We sat like that for a while. I thought about Eleanor, about a woman who had chosen differently, who had known something early that I had taken decades to understand, about sitting on her back porch near the lake in the summers, looking out at the water, and the thing she always said, a woman should always have something that belongs entirely to herself. I had not listened when she was alive, but I was listening now. I have her lake house too, as it happens. The estate included it. I drove up there by myself in September, before the settlement was finalized on a very still afternoon, when the lake was flat and the light was doing something extraordinary on the water. I stood on the back porch where we had sat together so many times. I thought, I know what I am doing now. I know who I am without a man's last name in front of my identity. I know what my bank accounts say. I know my own phone number and my own lawyer's number and my own financial planner's name. I know what belongs to me. I am 63 years old. I am a bookkeeper by training and a homemaker by a long detour, and a woman with $4.3 million by the grace of an aunt who loved me more clearly than I loved myself for too many years. I am not throwing anything away. I am just finally starting the count. I used to think that the hardest part of what I went through was finding out. The hotel receipt, the name in the text, the accounts I was never supposed to see. I thought the discovery was the wound, and that everything after was just recovery. But that's not quite right. The hardest part was the years before I found anything. The years when I handed over my financial independence one small concession at a time, each one so reasonable in the moment, so easy to explain away. He handles the money. He knows what's best. He's busy. It's easier this way. That slow erosion, that's the part that cost me the most, and I was the one who let it happen. Not out of stupidity, out of trust. And there is a difference, even if the outcome looks the same from the outside. What I understand now is that the choices we make quietly, consistently over years, the things we accept without questioning, the questions we don't ask because the answer might be uncomfortable, those choices build the life we end up living. Douglas made choices too, and his choices were, by any honest measure, worse than mine. But I can't spend whatever years I have left only thinking about what he did. I have to think about what I will do. What I already did, once I finally started paying attention. Eleanor paid attention her whole life. She never made a noise about it. She just built something solid and true in her own name on her own terms, quietly enough that no one thought to interfere with it. And then she handed it to me, along with a letter that asked me to think before I spoke. That letter was the most useful thing anyone has ever given me. It bought me time. Time is the thing I had been running out of without knowing it. There is something I want to say to anyone who recognizes something of themselves in this story, not as instruction, because I am not in a position to instruct anyone, but as something I genuinely wish someone had said to me 30 years ago. Know your own numbers. Not in a suspicious way, not because your marriage is failing or your partner is untrustworthy, but because you are a full person and full people know what belongs to them. A bank account, a credit history, a clear understanding of what your household actually earns and spends and holds. These are not romantic things to think about. They are also not optional if you want to be someone who can make a real choice when a real choice is required. Cassandra already knows all of this. I didn't teach her, she figured it out herself, the way her generation seems to. But I've told her about Eleanor's letter. I've told her to remember it. I am 63 years old, sitting in a house I kept, in a life I am rebuilding from the inside out. It is not the life I planned. It is quieter than I expected, and harder in some ways, and considerably lighter in others. I drink my coffee in the morning without wondering whose footsteps I'm about to hear on the stairs. That is not a small thing. Eleanor left me money. What she really left me was the chance to start counting. I intend to make it count.